Adiz woke before the sun rose. The small room was still dark, the faint blue light of dawn barely slipping through the thin curtains that covered the single window. The air was quiet except for the distant sound of a rooster crowing somewhere down the street. She slowly pushed herself upright on the bed. Her left leg, thin and stiff, refused to move at first. It had been like that since childhood. Some said it was a childhood illness that was never properly treated. Others whispered that it was spiritual. Adiz had long stopped caring about the explanations. All she knew was that walking had never been easy. She reached for the wooden crutches leaning against the wall and carefully slipped her arms into them. After years of practice, the movement had become second nature. Step, pause, step, pause. She moved across the small room toward the kitchen. The house was modest. Just 2 small rooms, a tiny sitting area, and a kitchen with a rusted gas burner that often refused to cooperate. The walls had faded paint, and the roof leaked slightly whenever the rains were heavy. But to Adiz it was still home, because Chinidu was there. She lit the stove and placed a small pot of water on it. Soon the faint smell of boiling tea leaves filled the kitchen. Behind her, she heard movement. Chinidu stepped into the doorway, his hair messy, his shoulders slightly slumped. "You're awake already?" he asked. Adiz turned and smiled warmly. "I always wake early. You should sleep more." She laughed softly. "And leave you to starve?" He smiled faintly, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Adiz noticed immediately. For the past 6 months, that same heavy expression had lived on his face. 6 months since he lost his job. Chinidu had once worked for a respected construction company in the city. He was a project supervisor and he loved his job. He talked about building roads, houses, and bridges with the excitement of a man who believed he was helping shape the future. Then the company suddenly downsized, and Chinidu was one of the first to be let go. At first he believed he would quickly find another job. But weeks turned into months, and the rejection emails kept coming. Adiz placed a cup of tea in front of him. "You have another interview today, right?" Chinidu nodded slowly. "Yes, a small construction firm." "That's good. It's not the kind of company I should be working for." Adiz sat across from him. "There is no shame in starting again." He looked down at his tea. "I used to supervise 50 workers. Now I'm begging for a junior role." Her voice was gentle. "You're not begging. You're rebuilding." Chinidu sighed deeply. "You always say the right things." Adiz smiled. "Someone has to." For a moment, silence filled the small kitchen. Then Chinidu suddenly spoke again. "Adiz, if things don't improve soon, we may have to move out." She nodded calmly. "I know." He looked up, surprised. "You do? The landlord came yesterday." Chinidu's face tightened. "And you didn't tell me? You already have enough worries." He rubbed his forehead. "I hate this." Adiz reached across the table and held his hand. "We will get through it." Her voice carried a quiet strength. "Together." Chinidu looked at her for a long moment. "You know most women would have left by now." Adiz laughed softly. "Well, most women aren't me." He squeezed her hand. "I'm serious. You deserve better." She shook her head. "I chose you, not your job." He didn't respond, but something softened in his expression. After breakfast, Chinidu prepared for his interview. His best suit hung loosely on his shoulders now. The stress had made him lose weight. Adiz watched him from the doorway as he adjusted his tie. "You look handsome," she said. He chuckled. "You say that every time." "Because it's true." He grabbed his worn leather briefcase. "Wish me luck." Adiz lifted her hand dramatically. "I command the universe to give my husband the job." Chinidu laughed. "You're ridiculous." But the laughter felt good. For a moment the weight of their problems disappeared. After he left, Adiz began her daily routine. She cleaned the house. Then she sat at the small wooden table with her laptop. 3 months earlier, Adiz had found a remote bookkeeping job online. It wasn't much, but it helped them survive. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. Numbers had always been her strength. By afternoon she closed the laptop and sighed. Her back ached from sitting too long. She stood slowly and moved toward the window. Outside, children played football on the dusty street. Adiz watched them quietly. Sometimes she wondered what her life would have been like if her leg had been normal. Would she have been more successful? More confident? Would people have treated her differently? But those thoughts never lasted long. Because whenever she looked at Chinidu, she believed her life had still turned out well. Even with her disability, she had love. And that was enough. The sun was setting when the front door suddenly burst open. Adiz! She jumped in surprise. Chinidu stood in the doorway breathing heavily. His eyes were wide. His face was glowing with excitement. Chinidu! He rushed toward her. I got it. You got the job? No. Her heart sank slightly. But then he shouted, I got the contract. She blinked. What contract? The government housing project. Adiz stared at him in confusion. That huge development outside the city? Yes. But that project is worth millions. I know. Chinidu grabbed her hands and spun her slightly before remembering her leg and stopping quickly. Sorry. She laughed breathlessly. Tell me everything. He began pacing excitedly. The company that interviewed me today wasn't hiring for a job. So why were you there? They were looking for someone to manage the entire housing project. Their last supervisor resigned. Adiz listened carefully. They asked about my experience, the projects I've handled, the teams I've led, and Chinidu grinned. And I impressed them. Her eyes widened. They offered me the contract. Adiz gasped. That's incredible. Chinidu laughed like a man who had just been reborn. Do you know what this means? What? Our lives are about to change. Adiz felt tears filling her eyes. All the months of struggle suddenly felt worth it. I told you your time would come, she whispered. Chinidu looked at her with deep emotion. You never stopped believing in me. Of course not. Even when everyone else said I was finished. She squeezed his hand. You're not finished. You're just getting started. He suddenly pulled her into a tight embrace. I couldn't have done this without you. That night they celebrated the only way they could afford. Adiz cooked their favorite meal, jollof rice with fried plantain. Chinidu brought out a cheap bottle of wine he had been saving for a special occasion. They sat together on the couch laughing like two people who had just escaped a storm. To new beginnings, Chinidu said, raising his glass. Adiz clinked her glass against his. To success. They drank. Then Chinidu looked at her again. When the money starts coming in, I'm going to buy you the best medical treatment in the world. Adiz raised an eyebrow. For what? For your leg. She shook her head. I've lived with it my whole life. But you shouldn't have to. He looked determined. You've sacrificed too much for me. It's my turn to take care of you. Her heart warmed at those words. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Just promise me one thing. What? No matter how successful you become, don't forget us. Chinidu laughed. How could I ever forget you? Adiz smiled. In that moment, she believed every word he said. She believed their love was unbreakable. She believed success would only bring them closer. She believed the man sitting beside her would always remember the woman who stood beside him when he had nothing. But sometimes, success doesn't strengthen love. Sometimes, it reveals the kind of heart that was hidden all along. 3 months later, Adiz hardly recognized the life she was living. The small bungalow they once struggled to afford had been replaced by a large modern house in a quiet, expensive neighborhood. The streets were lined with tall palm trees, and security guards stood watch at the gates of the estate. The kind of place Adiz had only ever seen in movies. When Chinidu first brought her there, she had been overwhelmed. You bought this? She asked in disbelief. Chinidu had smiled proudly. It's just the beginning. Everything had happened quickly after he secured the government housing project. The company managing the project trusted him so much that they gave him full control of the operations. Investors poured money into the development, and soon Chinidu's name began circulating among powerful business circles. The man who once waited nervously for interview emails was suddenly attending meetings with wealthy contractors and government officials. Adiz had never been more proud of him. But as the weeks passed, she began to notice something strange. Chinedu was changing. First, it was small things. He bought new suits, expensive ones, the kind that came in glossy shopping bags from luxury stores. His shoes were polished leather now instead of the worn pair he used to wear everywhere. Then came the car. One afternoon he pulled into the driveway with a sleek black Mercedes. Adiz stared through the window in shock. When he walked inside, she laughed in disbelief. "You bought a new car?" Chinedu tossed the keys onto the table. "What do you think?" "It's beautiful. You deserve a better life," he said casually. Adiz smiled warmly. "I already have one." He leaned down and kissed her forehead before rushing upstairs to prepare for another meeting. At first, she thought the busyness was temporary. Large projects required long hours. That was normal. But gradually, the long hours turned into long nights. Chinedu began coming home later and later. Some nights it was 10, other nights midnight, and sometimes he didn't return until 2 in the morning. Adiz tried not to worry. Instead, she focused on making their new house feel like a home. But the house was so big that it often felt empty. One evening she sat alone at the dining table. The table was designed to seat 8 people, but tonight only one plate sat on it. The food she had prepared, fried rice and grilled chicken, was growing cold. She glanced at the clock. 9:45 p.m. Adiz picked up her phone and dialed Chinedu's number. The call rang, then rang again. Finally, it went to voicemail. She lowered the phone slowly. This wasn't the first time. Over the past month, he had started ignoring many of her calls. Sometimes he would text hours later, "Busy," or "in a meeting." Adiz sighed quietly and began eating alone. By the time Chinedu finally arrived home, it was almost midnight. The sound of the front door opening echoed through the quiet house. Adiz was sitting in the living room when he walked in. "You're still awake?" he asked. "I was waiting for you." Chinedu loosened his tie and dropped his briefcase on the couch. "You shouldn't wait up." She stood slowly, leaning slightly on the armrest for balance. "I made dinner. I already ate." Adiz paused. "Oh." He walked past her toward the stairs. "I'm exhausted." But as he passed, Adiz caught a faint scent in the air. Perfume. Not hers. She frowned slightly. "Chinedu." He stopped. "Yes." "Where were you?" He turned slowly. "At work." "Until midnight?" "Yes." She hesitated. "Why didn't you answer your phone?" Chinedu frowned. "I told you I was busy. I was worried." His voice hardened slightly. "You worry too much." Adiz forced a small smile. "I just miss spending time with you." He didn't respond. Instead, he continued upstairs. Adiz watched him disappear down the hallway. Something inside her chest felt heavy, but she pushed the feeling away. Success came with pressure. She needed to be patient. The next morning, Adiz woke early as usual. But this time, Chinedu was already gone. His side of the bed was empty. She checked the clock. 6:30 a.m. On the bedside table sat a note. "Early meeting." She folded the paper quietly. Over the next few weeks, the distance between them grew. Chinedu began traveling frequently. Business trips, networking events, private dinners with investors. Adiz tried to be supportive, but sometimes the loneliness became overwhelming. One afternoon she overheard 2 women talking at a salon while she waited to get her hair braided. "Have you heard about that contractor making waves in the city?" one woman asked. "You mean Chinedu Okafor?" "Yes. They say he's becoming very rich." Adiz smiled quietly. That was her husband. But then the other woman spoke again. "I heard he's always surrounded by beautiful women at those business parties." Adiz's smile faded slightly. She tried to convince herself it was gossip. People always talked about successful men. Still, the words lingered in her mind. One night, she decided to confront him gently. Chinedu arrived home around 1 a.m. Adiz was sitting on the couch waiting. "You're awake again?" he asked. "Yes." He sighed. "Adiz, can we talk?" Chinedu dropped his briefcase. "What about?" She chose her words carefully. I feel like I'm losing you. He frowned. What does that mean? You're never home anymore. That's because I'm working. I understand that. But when you are home, it feels like you're somewhere else. Chinidu rubbed his temples. My life is very different now, Adiz. She looked confused. Different how? I'm dealing with powerful people, big investors, important opportunities. And I'm proud of you. But you don't understand the pressure. Her voice softened. Then help me understand. Instead of answering, Chinidu walked toward the kitchen and poured himself a drink. He took a long sip before speaking again. My world is bigger now. Adiz's stomach tightened. Bigger? Yes. He gestured around the luxurious house. Look at this place. Look at everything we have now. Yes. This didn't come from sitting at home. Adiz felt hurt creeping into her chest. I never asked you to stop working. But you expect me to be here every night. I expect you to be my husband. The words hung in the air. Chinidu stared at her for a moment. Then he said something that made her heart drop. My life has outgrown this small thinking. Adiz blinked. Small thinking? I'm operating in circles you wouldn't understand. She felt like she had been slapped. What does that mean? Chinidu sighed impatiently. It means my lifestyle has changed. Her voice trembled slightly. And I haven't? He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed his glass and walked upstairs. Adiz remained sitting on the couch long after he disappeared. The large house suddenly felt colder than ever. That night she barely slept. For the first time since their marriage, fear crept quietly into her heart. Not fear of poverty, not fear of hardship, but fear of something much worse. Losing the man she had loved and supported when he had nothing. What Adiz didn't know yet was that the worst betrayal of her life was already on its way to her front door. The silence in the house had become unbearable. Adiz sat alone in the living room, her hands resting quietly on the armrests of the couch as she stared at the large wall clock. Its ticking sounded unusually loud in the quiet space. Tick, tick, tick. It was past 10 p.m. Again. The house that once felt like a blessing now felt like a prison of loneliness. The wide rooms echoed with emptiness, and the expensive furniture only reminded her how much their lives had changed. But not in the way she had hoped. Adiz sighed and slowly pushed herself upright. Her crutches leaned against the couch beside her. She slipped her arms into them and carefully made her way toward the kitchen. She had cooked dinner hours earlier, Chinidu's favorite meal. Egusi soup with pounded yam. The soup had grown cold. Again. She reheated it on the stove, though she wasn't sure why. Perhaps out of habit. Perhaps out of hope. Or perhaps because she refused to believe that the distance between them had become permanent. Just as she turned off the stove, the sound of headlights flashed through the window. Adiz froze. Her heart lifted slightly. Chinidu was home. She quickly placed the food on the dining table and moved toward the living room. The sound of a car door closing echoed outside. Then another. Adiz frowned. 2 doors? Moments later the front door opened. Chinidu walked in first. But he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a woman. Adiz's heart dropped instantly. The woman was tall, slim, and dressed in a tight red dress that clung to her body like a second skin. Her long straight hair fell neatly over her shoulders, and her heels clicked confidently against the marble floor as she stepped inside. She looked around the house with a slow, curious smile. This place is beautiful, the woman said. Adiz stood frozen in the middle of the room. Her voice came out quietly. Chinidu? Who is this? Chinidu didn't answer immediately. He walked past Adiz toward the bar cabinet in the corner and poured himself a drink. The woman finally turned her attention toward Adiz. Her eyes moved slowly from Adiz's crutches to her leg, then back to her face. A faint smirk appeared on her lips. Adiz felt the insult immediately. Chinidu, she repeated, her voice firmer this time. He took a sip of his drink before speaking. This is Vanessa. Adiz blinked. Vanessa. The woman gave a small wave. Hi. Adiz looked back at her husband, confusion filling her chest. And why is Vanessa here? Vanessa laughed softly, like someone enjoying a private joke. Chinedu sighed as if he were already tired of the conversation. Adiz, sit down. Her grip tightened on her crutches. No. I want you to answer my question. Chinedu turned toward Vanessa. You should sit. Vanessa walked casually to the couch and sat down like she owned the place. Adiz watched in disbelief. Chinedu. He finally faced her. Adiz. This conversation was going to happen eventually. A cold chill ran through her body. What conversation? Chinedu rubbed the back of his neck. Our marriage isn't working anymore. The words hit her like thunder. What? He spoke slowly, almost mechanically. My life has changed. I know that, Adiz said quickly. But we can adjust together. He shook his head. You don't understand. Then explain it to me. Vanessa rolled her eyes from the couch. Do we really have to do this tonight? Adiz turned toward her sharply. Stay out of this. Vanessa smirked. I would. But unfortunately it concerns me too. Adiz's heart pounded harder. What do you mean? Vanessa leaned back comfortably. I'm his girlfriend. The words hung in the air like poison. Adiz stared at Chinedu. Tell her she's lying. But Chinedu didn't speak. He simply looked away. And in that moment, Adiz knew the truth. Her chest tightened painfully. How long? She whispered. Chinedu sighed. A few months. A few months. Her voice trembled. You've been cheating on me for months? It's not like that. Then what is it like? Chinedu's patience snapped. It's reality. The sudden shout echoed through the house. He pointed toward Vanessa. She understands my world. Adiz felt tears burning her eyes. And I don't. You don't fit into the life I'm living now. The words sliced through her. I supported you when you had nothing. Yes, you did, he replied flatly. I sold my jewelry so we could pay rent. I know. I stayed with you when everyone said you were finished. I know that too. Then how can you do this to me? Chinedu's voice turned cold. Because my life has outgrown you. The room felt like it was spinning. Adiz stared at him in disbelief. Outgrown me? Yes. He gestured around the house. This is the world I live in now. And I'm your wife. Vanessa laughed mockingly. Not for long. Adiz turned toward her again. Why are you even here? Vanessa crossed her legs. Because Chinedu invited me. Adiz looked back at him. You brought your mistress into our home? Chinedu's expression hardened. This house is mine. The words hit Adiz harder than anything else he had said. Her voice broke. We built this life together. No, he replied. I built this life. Silence filled the room. Adiz felt her entire world collapsing. Chinedu, please, she whispered. For the first time, her voice carried desperation. Don't do this. But Chinedu had already made up his mind. Adiz, you should leave. Her heart stopped. What? You should move out. The words felt unreal. I can barely walk, she said softly. That's not my problem anymore. Tears streamed down her face. Where will I go? Chinedu looked away. I'm sure you'll figure something out. Vanessa stood up and walked toward him. She placed her hand on his chest possessively. Babe, can we go upstairs now? I'm tired. Adiz stared at them both in horror. This is my home. Chinedu pointed toward the door. Not anymore. The world went silent. Adiz felt something inside her heart break completely. Slowly, painfully, she turned toward the door. Every step with her crutches felt heavier than the last. She reached the doorway and paused. For a brief moment she hoped Chinedu would call her back. That he would realize what he was doing. That he would remember the woman who had stood beside him when he had nothing. But the only sound behind her was Vanessa laughing softly. Adiz stepped outside. The night air was cold. The large gate closed behind her with a metallic clang. She stood alone on the quiet street, holding her small handbag. The house she once called home now belonged to someone else. Her husband had replaced her. And just like that, the woman who sacrificed everything had been thrown away. Adiz did not remember how long she stood outside the gate. The tall iron bars of the mansion loomed behind her like a wall separating two different worlds. On the other side were bright lights, polished floors, and the life she had built with the man she loved. On this side there was nothing, just the quiet street and the cool night air. Her hands trembled slightly as she tightened her grip on her crutches. Her small handbag hung loosely on her shoulder, the only thing she had managed to carry out of the house. No clothes, no money, no plan. For a long moment, she stared at the closed gate, hoping, almost expecting, it would open again, that Chinidu would run out, that he would say he made a mistake. But the gate remained closed. From somewhere inside the house, faint laughter drifted into the night. Vanessa's laughter. Adiz swallowed hard. The sound felt like salt poured into an open wound. Slowly, she turned away. Step, pause, step, pause. Each movement with her crutches felt heavier than the last. The estate road was long and quiet. Tall streetlights illuminated the sidewalks, casting soft pools of yellow light on the pavement. Adiz moved slowly down the road. Her chest felt hollow. Just hours ago she had been a married woman sitting in her living room waiting for her husband. Now she was a homeless woman walking alone in the dark. Tears blurred her vision, but she kept moving. Eventually she reached the estate gate. The security guard looked up as she approached. His expression changed when he recognized her. Madame Adiz? She forced a weak smile. Yes. Are you going somewhere this late? She hesitated. Yes. I just need some air. The guard nodded politely and opened the gate. Adiz stepped outside the estate. Immediately the environment changed. The quiet luxury of the neighborhood faded into the noisy chaos of the city. Motorcycles sped past, street vendors shouted from roadside stalls, and the smell of roasted corn drifted through the humid air. Adiz stopped walking. Only now did the reality of her situation truly settle into her mind. Where would she go? She had no close family in the city. Most of her old friends had moved away years ago, and the little money she once had been invested into Chinidu's early business plans. She had given him everything. Now she had nothing. A painful lump formed in her throat. She looked down the road and saw a bus stop a short distance away. With no better idea, she began moving toward it. By the time she reached the bench, exhaustion had already taken over her body. She sat down carefully, resting her crutches beside her. The night was warm, but Adiz felt cold inside. People came and went at the bus stop. Some glanced at her curiously. Others ignored her completely. Hours passed. Eventually the crowd disappeared. The street grew quiet. Adiz leaned back against the metal bench and stared up at the dark sky. Her mind replayed the events of the night over and over. Chinidu's voice, his cold expression, the way he pointed to the door. You should leave. The memory made her chest ache. She had loved him, not because he was rich, not because he was successful, but because she believed in him when no one else did. And somehow, that love had not been enough. Tears slid silently down her cheeks. At some point, exhaustion finally overcame her. She fell asleep on the bench. The morning sun woke her. Adiz blinked slowly, disoriented for a moment. Then reality returned. She was still at the bus stop. Her body ached from sleeping on the hard bench. Her leg felt stiff and sore. People were already moving around the busy street again. Vendors pushed carts filled with bread and fruit. Motorcycles honked loudly as they passed. Adiz rubbed her eyes. Her stomach growled painfully. She hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon. Across the street, a small food stall was selling akara and pap. The smell made her mouth water. But she had no money. Adiz lowered her gaze. For the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to truly have nothing. She spent the morning sitting quietly on the bench. By midday, the heat became unbearable. Her throat felt dry. Eventually she gathered enough courage to approach a nearby food stall. The woman running it looked at her suspiciously. Yes. Adiz spoke softly. Please, may I have some water? The woman studied her for a moment. Then she poured a small cup of water and handed it over. Adiz drank it gratefully. "Thank you." The woman nodded but said nothing else. Adiz returned to the bus stop. The day slowly passed. By evening, hunger had turned into a painful ache. She watched as people bought food from vendors. The smell of fried plantain drifted through the air. Her stomach twisted. Just as the sun began setting, a young boy approached her. He carried a small plastic bag. "My mother said to give you this," he said. Adiz looked confused. Inside the bag was a small portion of rice. She looked across the street and saw the food stall woman watching her. Adiz felt tears fill her eyes again. She bowed her head slightly in gratitude. The rice tasted like the best meal she had ever eaten. That night she slept at the bus stop again. Then another night. And another. Days blurred together. Her clothes became dusty. Her hair tangled. Sometimes kind strangers gave her small portions of food. Other times she went hungry. Adiz had never imagined her life could fall so far so quickly. Yet through all the pain, one thing kept her moving forward. Hope. She refused to believe this was the end of her story. One afternoon, a black car slowed as it drove past the bus stop. The driver glanced casually toward the bench, then suddenly slammed the brakes. The car reversed quickly. Adiz barely noticed. She was staring down at the ground, lost in her thoughts. The car door opened. Footsteps approached. Then a familiar voice spoke. "Adiz?" She froze. Slowly, she lifted her head. Standing in front of her was a man she hadn't seen in years. Tall, well-dressed, his face filled with shock. "Tund?" she whispered. It was her childhood friend. He stared at her in disbelief. "What happened to you?" Adiz tried to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. Tund knelt beside her. "Adiz, why are you here?" Her eyes filled with tears. "My husband," she began weakly. Tund waited patiently. "He threw me out." For a moment Tund said nothing, but the anger in his eyes was unmistakable. "That fool," he muttered under his breath. Then he stood up and gently helped her to her feet. "Come with me." Adiz hesitated. "I don't want to be a burden." Tund looked at her firmly. "You're not a burden." He picked up her crutches and guided her toward his car. "You're my friend." For the first time in days, Adiz felt something warm inside her chest. Hope. And though she didn't know it yet, this moment would become the beginning of a completely new life. Adiz sat quietly in the passenger seat of Tund's car as they drove through the evening traffic. The city lights blurred past the window, but she barely noticed them. Her mind was still struggling to process what had just happened. Only an hour ago, she had been sitting on a dusty bench at a bus stop, unsure where her life was heading. Now she was in a warm car beside someone who knew her. Someone from a time when life had been simpler. Tund glanced at her briefly before returning his eyes to the road. "You've been living at that bus stop?" he asked gently. Adiz nodded. "For about a week." His jaw tightened. "A whole week?" She gave a small, embarrassed shrug. "I didn't know where else to go." Tund shook his head slowly. "You should have called someone." Adiz let out a quiet sigh. "I didn't want anyone to see me like that." He didn't respond immediately. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, just heavy with unspoken thoughts. Finally he said, "You're coming to my house." Adiz hesitated. "Tund, I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing." "But..." "Adiz." His tone was firm but kind. "You're staying with me until you figure things out." She looked down at her hands. "I don't even have anything. No clothes. No money." "That doesn't matter." She glanced at him. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Tund gave a small smile. "Because once upon a time you were kind to me." Adiz frowned slightly. "When? You don't remember?" She shook her head. Tund chuckled softly. "When we were teenagers, everyone used to tease me because my father was a mechanic. Oh, they said I'd never become anything." Adiz's eyes softened as she remembered. "But you were always studying harder than everyone else." "Most people laughed at me," Tund continued. "But you told me something that stuck with me." "What did I say?" You said, the world doesn't decide your future. You do. Adiz smiled faintly. I said that. You did. He pulled the car into a quiet neighborhood. And I never forgot it. Moments later, they stopped in front of a neat, modern house. It wasn't as large as the mansion she had lived in with Chinidu, but it was beautiful in a quiet, comfortable way. Tund stepped out and walked around to help her. Careful, he said as she got out. They entered the house together. The interior was simple but warm. Soft lighting filled the living room, and the faint scent of fresh flowers lingered in the air. Adiz looked around slowly. It's beautiful. Thank you. Tund placed her crutches near the couch. Sit. She lowered herself carefully onto the couch. I'll get you something to eat, he said. Adiz opened her mouth to protest, but her stomach growled loudly before she could speak. Tund laughed. I'll take that as a yes. A few minutes later, he returned with a plate of food. Rice, chicken, vegetables. Adiz stared at it like someone seeing a miracle. Thank you, she whispered. She began eating slowly at first. Then hunger took over. Tund sat across from her, watching quietly. After a few moments, he spoke again. What exactly happened with your husband? Adiz stopped eating. The painful memories returned instantly. He changed. Tund nodded. Money? Yes. She looked down at her plate. I supported him when he lost his job. I paid bills. I believed in him when everyone else gave up. And when he became successful? He said I no longer fit into his lifestyle. Tund's expression darkened. That's cruel. He brought another woman into our house. Tund clenched his jaw. And threw me out. Silence filled the room. Finally Tund spoke quietly. You deserved better than that. Adiz swallowed the lump in her throat. Maybe I was just foolish. No, he said firmly. You were loyal. She finished eating and leaned back on the couch, exhaustion spreading through her body. Tund noticed. You should rest. He helped her to a guest room. The bed looked unbelievably soft. Adiz sat down slowly. I can't thank you enough. You don't have to. He paused at the door. We'll figure out your next steps tomorrow. Adiz nodded. For the first time in days, she slept peacefully. The next morning, Adiz woke to sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment, she forgot everything that had happened. Then the memories returned. But this time, the pain felt slightly lighter. She slowly got out of bed and made her way into the living room. Tund was already there. He stood beside a set of exercise equipment. Adiz, he said with a smile. Good morning. Good morning. She glanced around curiously. What do you do exactly? I'm a physical therapist. Her eyebrows lifted in surprise. Really? Yes. He studied her leg carefully. How long has your leg been like this? Since I was a child. Have you ever tried therapy? No. Why not? My family couldn't afford it. Tund nodded thoughtfully. Then he said something unexpected. I think you can walk. Adiz laughed softly. Tund, I've been crippled my entire life. That doesn't mean it's permanent. She shook her head. You're just trying to make me feel better. No. His voice was calm but confident. I'm serious. He knelt beside her and gently examined her leg. The muscles are weak, but they're not completely damaged. Adiz watched him carefully. You really think it's possible? Yes. Her heart beat faster. But it will take work. How much work? Daily exercises. How long? Months. Maybe longer. Adiz thought for a moment. Then she nodded. I'll try. Tund smiled. That's all I need to hear. The first exercise session was painful. Tund helped her stand while holding onto a support bar. Her leg trembled immediately. It's okay, he said calmly. Your muscles are waking up. Adiz clenched her teeth. It hurts. I know. She tried taking a small step. Her leg wobbled. She almost fell. But Tund caught her. Easy. She laughed breathlessly. I feel like a baby learning to walk. That's exactly what you're doing. Days turned into weeks. Every morning they practiced. Stretching. Strength training. balance exercises. At first Adiz could barely stand for 30 seconds. But gradually her body began responding. One afternoon something incredible happened. Tund helped her stand again. "Try a step," he said. Adiz hesitated. "I'll fall. I'm right here." She took a deep breath. Then she lifted her weak leg. Slowly, carefully, she placed it forward. Her body trembled, but she didn't fall. Adiz gasped. "I did it." Tund grinned. "Yes, you did." Tears filled her eyes. For the first time in her life, Adiz had taken a real step, and though she didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning of her transformation. The first step Adiz took without falling felt like a miracle. For several seconds she simply stood there, staring at her own feet as if they belonged to someone else. Her heart pounded loudly in her chest, and tears filled her eyes before she even realized she was crying. "I'm standing," she whispered. Tund smiled proudly beside her. "You're doing more than standing." Adiz slowly lifted her head to look at him. "I'm walking." He nodded. "Yes." Her legs trembled from the effort, but the excitement rushing through her body pushed away the exhaustion. For 30 years she had lived with the belief that walking normally would never be possible. Yet here she was, taking steps, small ones, unsteady ones, but steps nonetheless. Emotion overwhelmed her. She suddenly threw her arms around Tund in a tight hug. "Thank you," she said through tears. Tund laughed gently, surprised by the sudden embrace. "Careful. You might knock both of us over." Adiz quickly stepped back, embarrassed. "Sorry. No need to apologize." He handed her a towel to wipe the sweat from her face. "You're making incredible progress. How long do you think it will take before I can walk normally?" Tund thought for a moment. "If you keep improving like this, a few more months." Adiz shook her head in amazement. "All these years, I believed my body was broken. Your body just needed the right support." His words lingered in her mind long after the therapy session ended. For the first time since Chinidu threw her out, Adiz felt something she had nearly forgotten: hope. The weeks that followed were filled with steady progress. Every morning began with therapy exercises, stretching, balance drills, walking practice. The pain in her muscles was constant, but Adiz welcomed it. It meant her body was changing. Each day she could walk a little farther. Each day her crutches felt less necessary. Soon she was able to move short distances around the house using only a walking cane. The first time she crossed the living room without crutches, she laughed like a child. "Tund, did you see that?" "I saw," he replied with a proud smile. "You're becoming stronger every day." But therapy was not the only change happening in Adiz's life. Living in Tund's house gave her time to rediscover parts of herself that had been buried for years. One afternoon she wandered into Tund's small office. Stacks of patient files covered the desk. Charts, medical notes, and appointment schedules were scattered everywhere. Adiz frowned. "This place is a disaster." Tund looked up from his laptop. "I know. You could never find anything here. I manage." Adiz rolled up her sleeves. "No, you don't." Within 2 hours, the office looked completely different. The files were neatly organized. Appointments were arranged by date. The desk was clear. Tund walked in and stared at the room in disbelief. "What happened here?" Adiz smiled proudly. "Organization." He looked at the neatly labeled folders. "You did all this?" "Yes." Tund chuckled. "You missed your calling. I used to do bookkeeping." "Really?" She nodded. "Before I married Chinidu, I worked for a small company." "Why did you stop?" Adiz shrugged. "Marriage, life, things changed." Tund leaned against the doorway thoughtfully. "You're good with numbers?" "Very." "Then why aren't you working again?" Adiz hesitated. "I don't know if anyone would hire me." "Why wouldn't they?" "My work experience is old, and I've been out of the job market for years." Tund shook his head. "You're smart and hardworking. Someone will recognize that." His confidence in her felt strange at first. For so long Adiz had defined herself through her role as Chinidu's wife. Now she was being forced to rediscover who she was on her own. Later that evening, Tund placed a laptop on the table in front of her. "What's this?" she asked. "Your job search." Adiz laughed nervously. "You're serious?" "Very. But I'm still learning to walk again. That doesn't mean your life should be on hold." She looked at the laptop screen. Several bank job openings were displayed. "Banks always need people who understand numbers," Tund said. Adiz felt a small spark of excitement. Maybe it was time to rebuild her life. Over the next few weeks, Adiz sent out several job applications. Most of them received no response. But one afternoon her phone rang. She answered nervously. "Hello. Good afternoon. Is this Adiz Okafor?" "Yes. We received your application for the accounting assistant position at Zenith Trust Bank." Adiz sat up straight. "Yes, that's me. We would like to invite you for an interview." Her heart raced. "When?" "Tomorrow morning." After the call ended, Adiz stared at the phone in disbelief. "Tund!" she shouted. He rushed into the room. "What happened?" "I have an interview." He broke into a wide grin. "That's amazing." Adiz suddenly felt nervous. "What if I fail?" "You won't." "But what if they see my leg and think I'm not capable?" Tund looked at her seriously. "Your ability is not defined by your leg." His words gave her strength. The next morning Adiz walked into the bank building using only a cane. Her heart pounded as she entered the interview room. 3 interviewers sat across the table. They asked about her experience, her knowledge of accounting, her ability to manage financial records. Adiz answered every question with quiet confidence. Numbers had always been her strength. When the interview ended, one of the managers smiled. "You're very impressive, Mrs. Okafor." Adiz returned home feeling hopeful. 2 days later, the phone rang again. She had gotten the job. The new job brought new energy into her life. Every morning she dressed carefully for work. Each step she took into the bank building felt like another victory over the life she had lost. Meanwhile, her therapy continued. Her walking improved rapidly. Soon she no longer needed the cane. The first time she walked completely unaided across the living room. Tund stared in amazement. "You're doing it," he said. Adiz spun around happily. "I'm really doing it." Their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Something deeper than friendship had been quietly growing between them. One evening they stood together on the balcony watching the sunset paint the sky orange and gold. Adiz leaned against the railing. "I used to think my life ended the day Chinidu threw me out." Tund looked at her gently. "But it didn't." "No." She turned toward him. "You helped me find a new beginning." Tund stepped closer. "You found it yourself." Their faces were only inches apart now. Adiz felt her heart beating faster. For the first time since her painful past, she allowed herself to imagine loving someone again. Slowly, carefully, Tund leaned in. Adiz didn't pull away. Their lips met in a soft, gentle kiss. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was quiet, warm, healing. When they finally pulled apart, Adiz smiled shyly. "I didn't expect that." Tund laughed softly. "Neither did I." But deep inside, they both knew the truth. This was not just the beginning of Adiz's physical recovery. It was the beginning of something even more powerful. A new love, and a brand new life waiting ahead. The first day Adiz walked into the bank as an employee felt unreal. She paused briefly at the glass entrance doors, watching the reflection staring back at her. For a moment she hardly recognized herself. The woman standing there was confident, well-dressed, and standing on both legs without crutches or a cane. Just months ago she had been sleeping on a bus stop bench, uncertain if life would ever improve. Now she wore a neatly pressed navy blue suit, her hair tied into a professional bun. A slim handbag rested on her shoulder as she stepped confidently into the building. Each step felt like a victory. Inside, the bank buzzed with activity. Customers lined up at the counters while staff moved quickly between desks, computers, and paperwork. Adiz walked toward the office where the branch supervisor waited. "You must be Adiz," the supervisor said warmly. Yes, ma'am. I'm Mrs. Bello. Welcome to the team. Thank you. Mrs. Bello handed her an identification card. You'll be working with the accounts department. Your job will involve reviewing transaction records, balancing accounts, and assisting with financial reports. Adiz nodded eagerly. That sounds perfect. Mrs. Bello studied her for a moment. You seem confident. Adiz smiled slightly. I've always loved working with numbers. Well, Mrs. Bello said, gesturing toward a desk near the window. Let's see what you can do. The first few weeks were challenging. Bank work required accuracy, patience, and attention to detail. Every transaction had to be recorded properly, every number verified. Adiz embraced the challenge. She arrived early every morning. Often she stayed late reviewing files or double-checking reports. Her colleagues began noticing quickly. One afternoon, a young teller named Grace leaned over her desk. How do you work so fast? Adiz laughed. I've had lots of practice. Grace shook her head in amazement. I've never seen someone reconcile accounts this quickly. Adiz smiled modestly. Numbers speak a language I understand. Her dedication soon caught the attention of Mrs. Bello. One day the supervisor called her into the office. Adiz, sit down. Adiz obeyed, slightly nervous. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Bello placed a stack of documents on the table. These were reports you handled last week. Yes. They were perfect. Adiz blinked in surprise. No errors. She felt warmth spread through her chest. Thank you. Mrs. Bello leaned back in her chair. You're very talented. Honestly, I'm surprised someone with your ability applied for such a junior position. Adiz hesitated. I needed a fresh start. Mrs. Bello studied her thoughtfully. Well, I'm glad you came here. While Adiz's professional life began to flourish, her personal life continued to blossom as well. Every evening she returned to Tund's house. The warm smell of dinner often greeted her at the door. Tund had taken it upon himself to learn cooking, though sometimes the results were questionable. One evening Adiz walked into the kitchen and stared suspiciously at the pot on the stove. What is that? Tund grinned proudly. Jollof rice. Adiz lifted the lid. The rice looked unusual. Why is it orange? That's the color of jollof. Yes, but not that orange. He shrugged. I might have added too much pepper. Adiz laughed. Let me guess. You didn't measure anything? Measurements are for amateurs. She shook her head. Well, tonight we'll find out if your confidence is justified. To her surprise, the rice actually tasted good. Not perfect, but good. Tund leaned back proudly. See? Natural talent. Adiz laughed again. Moments like these filled their home with warmth. There was no tension, no cold silence, just companionship, peace. Sometimes they sat together on the balcony after dinner, talking about their days. One evening Tund watched her as she walked across the living room without assistance. You're walking like someone who was never injured, he said. Adiz smiled. Sometimes I still wake up expecting to reach for my crutches. And then I remember I don't need them anymore. Tund nodded thoughtfully. You've come a long way. Yes, Adiz said quietly. And it's because of you. He shook his head. No, it's because you refused to give up. Their eyes met. The quiet understanding between them had grown deeper over the months. Their relationship had become natural, effortless. They no longer questioned it. Love had simply grown between them. At the bank, Adiz's reputation continued growing. 6 months into her job, Mrs. Bello called another meeting. Adiz, your performance has been exceptional. Adiz sat calmly, though excitement stirred inside her. Thank you. We're promoting you to senior accounts officer. Her eyes widened. That's a big step. You earned it. Adiz left the office that day feeling proud. When she told Tund the news that evening, he nearly lifted her off the ground in celebration. I knew it, he said. You're unstoppable. Adiz laughed breathlessly. Careful. You'll break my ribs. Impossible. They celebrated with dinner at a small restaurant nearby. As they sat across from each other, Tund raised his glass. To Adiz. She raised her glass as well. To second chances. Years passed. Adiz's career continued rising steadily. Her dedication, intelligence, and leadership ability made her stand out among the staff. Eventually she was promoted again, and then again, until one day, Mrs. Bello called her into the office for what would become the biggest moment of her professional life. Adiz, I'm retiring next month. Adiz blinked in surprise. You are? Yes. Mrs. Bello slid a document across the desk. The bank directors have decided who will replace me. Adiz glanced at the paper. Her breath caught. Branch manager. Her name was written at the top. She looked up in shock. Me? Mrs. Bello smiled warmly. You're the best person for the job. Adiz felt overwhelmed. Thank you. You've earned it. That evening she stood in her new office, looking out through the large glass windows at the city skyline. The journey from the bus stop bench to this moment felt unbelievable. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Tund. Proud of you. Adiz smiled. She typed back. Dinner tonight? The reply came instantly. Always. For the first time in many years, Adiz felt completely at peace with her life. She had rebuilt everything she once lost. Her confidence, her independence, her love. What she didn't know yet was that the past she thought she had left behind was about to return in the most unexpected way. While Adiz's life steadily rose to new heights, Chinidu's world was beginning to collapse. At first, everything had seemed perfect. The government housing project had brought him more money than he had ever imagined. Investors trusted him, contractors respected him, and his name had become well known in the city's business circles. Everywhere he went, people treated him like a rising star. And Vanessa loved it. She loved the expensive restaurants, the designer handbags, the luxury vacations, the parties filled with wealthy businessmen and glamorous women. In the beginning, Chinidu had enjoyed it too. After years of struggling, the wealth felt like a reward he had finally earned. But slowly, the excitement of success turned into something else. Pressure. More investors wanted faster results. Contractors demanded payments. Suppliers expected their money on time. The housing project required careful management and discipline. But Chinidu was no longer the careful man he used to be. Instead of focusing on the project, he began spending more time enjoying the lifestyle his success had brought. Vanessa encouraged it. One evening they sat in an upscale restaurant downtown. Soft music played in the background as waiters moved between tables carrying plates of expensive food. Vanessa scrolled through her phone while Chinidu sipped a glass of whiskey. Look at this bag, she said excitedly, turning the phone toward him. The price tag showed clearly on the screen. Chinidu frowned slightly. That's $5,000. So, that's a lot for a bag. Vanessa rolled her eyes. You're worth millions now. That money is for the project. And the project will make even more money. She leaned closer to him. Stop worrying so much. Successful men enjoy their lives. Chinidu hesitated, but eventually he nodded. Fine. Vanessa smiled widely. I knew you'd understand. Moments like this became common. The expensive purchases slowly increased. Luxury clothes, jewelry, weekend trips, a new sports car. At first Chinidu told himself it was harmless. But the spending continued growing. Soon Vanessa began hosting lavish parties at the house. Music blasted through the mansion late into the night as guests drank expensive champagne and danced beside the swimming pool. One evening, Chinidu stood on the balcony watching the party below. A friend named Emeka joined him. You're living the dream, Emeka said with a grin. Chinidu forced a smile. It's not as easy as it looks. Emeka raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? The project costs are rising. So raise the budget. It's not that simple. Emeka shrugged. You worry too much. You've got money. Chinidu looked down at his glass. Yes, for now. But even as he said it, a quiet voice inside his mind whispered something he didn't want to admit. The money was disappearing faster than he expected. Meanwhile, Vanessa's demands grew bigger. One afternoon she stormed into the living room holding a shopping catalog. "Chinidu." He looked up from his laptop. "What is it?" "I need new furniture." Chinidu frowned. "We just bought furniture last year." "That was last year. What's wrong with the furniture we have? It's outdated." He stared at her in disbelief. "Outdated?" "Yes." She pointed at the magazine. "I want this set." Chinidu glanced at the price. His stomach tightened. "That's extremely expensive." Vanessa crossed her arms. "You can afford it. The project budget is tight right now." Her expression hardened. "So you're saying no?" "I'm saying we should be careful." Vanessa scoffed. "You've changed." Chinidu blinked. "Changed? You used to spoil me. And I still do. But not enough." Her words irritated him. "I'm dealing with serious financial decisions." Vanessa turned away dramatically. "If you can't afford this lifestyle, just say so." The comment stung. Chinidu slammed his laptop shut. "I never said I couldn't afford it." "Then prove it." And once again, Chinidu gave in. But the problems didn't stop there. The housing project began experiencing delays. Contractors complained about unpaid invoices. Suppliers refused to deliver materials without payment. Chinidu started borrowing money to keep the project moving. At first he believed the delays were temporary, but the debts continued growing. Soon the bank began calling. One morning Chinidu sat in his office reviewing financial statements. The numbers made his head spin. Millions had already been spent, but the project was far from finished. His phone rang. It was the bank. "Mr. Okafor, we need to discuss your outstanding loan payments." Chinidu rubbed his temples. "I'll handle it." "You are already 2 months behind." "I said I'll handle it." But deep down he knew he was running out of options. At home, Vanessa remained unaware of how serious the situation had become. One evening she walked into the living room carrying shopping bags. "Look what I bought." Chinidu stared at the bags in disbelief. "More clothes. They were on sale. How much did you spend?" "Don't worry about it." His patience finally snapped. "Vanessa." She froze. "What?" "We need to talk about money." Her expression darkened. "What about it?" "We need to slow down." She laughed. "You're joking." "I'm serious." "You're rich." "Not as rich as you think." Vanessa crossed her arms. Vanessa crossed her arms. "So now you're suddenly broke?" "That's not what I said." She shook her head in frustration. "This is not the life you promised me." Chinidu stared at her. "And what life is that?" "A luxury life." He laughed bitterly. "You only care about money." "Of course I do." The blunt honesty stunned him. "That's the reason you're with me, isn't it?" Vanessa didn't answer. Her silence was all the confirmation he needed. For the first time, Chinidu felt a deep unease in his chest. But it was too late to undo the damage. Months passed. The debts grew larger. The bank issued warnings. The mortgage on the mansion fell behind. Eventually the letter arrived. A foreclosure notice. Chinidu sat at the dining table staring at the paper. His hands trembled slightly. The morning sun shone brightly through the tall glass windows of Adiz's office. From the outside, the Zenith Trust Bank building looked calm and professional. Just another corporate tower in the busy city. But inside, Adiz's office buzzed with activity. Stacks of files covered her desk. Emails flashed on her computer screen. Phone calls came in one after another. Being branch manager meant responsibility. But Adiz handled it with quiet confidence. Years earlier she had once believed her life was over when she was thrown out of her husband's house. Now she sat behind a large wooden desk, managing one of the most respected bank branches in the city. She had rebuilt everything. Her career, her independence, her confidence, and her heart. A soft knock sounded at the door. "Come in," she said. Her assistant, Grace, stepped inside holding a file. "Good morning, ma'am." "Good morning, Grace." Grace placed the file on the desk. "This is the foreclosure case scheduled for today." Adiz opened the folder. Inside were documents related to a luxury property whose owner had failed to keep up with mortgage payments. The loan had been overdue for months. Multiple warning letters had been sent. The bank had no choice but to repossess the property. Adiz sighed softly. Foreclosures were never pleasant. Losing a home was painful no matter the circumstances. Still, the bank had procedures to follow. She scanned the paperwork. Who is the property owner? Grace checked the documents. Mr. Chinedu Okafor. Adiz froze. For a moment she thought she had misheard. Repeat that. Grace looked confused. Chinedu Okafor. The name echoed in Adiz's mind like thunder. Her ex-husband. The same man who had thrown her out of his house years ago. The same man who had told her she didn't fit into his lifestyle anymore. Adiz slowly closed the file. Grace noticed the sudden tension in her expression. Ma'am, is something wrong? Adiz shook her head calmly. No. She opened the file again. Her face remained professional, but inside her heart beat faster. So this was how fate worked. Of all the foreclosure cases in the city, this one belonged to him. Grace spoke again. The recovery team is ready whenever you are. Adiz stood up slowly. Let's go. The bank vehicle pulled into the quiet neighborhood half an hour later. 2 security officers and 3 bank staff members accompanied Adiz. The street was lined with luxurious houses, tall gates, manicured lawns, swimming pools hidden behind high walls. Adiz recognized the area instantly. Her chest tightened slightly. This was the same estate she once lived in with Chinedu, the same place where she had been thrown out in the middle of the night. She stared out the window silently as the car rolled down the familiar road. Memories flashed through her mind. Walking beside Chinedu in the early days when they first moved in. The excitement of their new life. The night everything changed. When the vehicle finally stopped, Adiz looked up. The mansion stood exactly as she remembered. Tall white walls, large glass windows, a beautiful driveway. But something was different now. The once perfect lawn looked neglected. The paint on the gate had begun peeling. The house no longer looked like the home of a successful man. Adiz stepped out of the car. Her staff gathered behind her. Grace whispered softly, "Are you okay, ma'am?" Adiz nodded. Yes. She walked toward the gate. One of the security officers pressed the doorbell. Moments later the door opened. And there he was, Chinedu. He looked older, more tired. The confident glow he once carried was gone. His eyes widened the moment he saw her. Adiz? The sound of her name on his lips felt strange after so many years. Adiz remained calm. Good morning, Mr. Okafor. His gaze dropped to her legs. You're walking. Yes. Shock spread across his face. How is that possible? She didn't answer. Behind him, Vanessa appeared in the doorway. Her once glamorous appearance had faded. Her hair looked messy. Her expensive clothes were gone. Instead, she wore a simple dress and slippers. What's going on? Vanessa demanded. Then she noticed the bank staff. What is this? Adiz spoke calmly. I'm here on behalf of Zenith Trust Bank. Chinedu's expression slowly changed as realization dawned. No. Yes. She held up the documents. This property has been foreclosed. Vanessa gasped. You can't do that. Adiz remained composed. Multiple payment notices were sent. Chinedu ran a hand through his hair. I was trying to arrange the money. The bank waited 6 months. Vanessa's voice rose angrily. This is harassment. Adiz ignored her and addressed Chinedu directly. You are required to vacate the property immediately. The words hung heavily in the air. For a moment nobody moved. Then Vanessa exploded. This is ridiculous. She pointed at Adiz. You think you're powerful because you work for a bank? Adiz's expression remained calm. Security. One of the guards stepped forward. Vanessa fell silent. Chinedu looked completely defeated. He glanced around the house slowly. The house that had once symbolized his success. The house he had thrown Adiz out of. Now it was being taken away from him. He looked back at her. You're the branch manager? Yes. His voice shook slightly. I never imagined. Adiz said nothing. Behind her, the bank staff began documenting the property. One officer spoke firmly. You have 30 minutes to collect your personal belongings. Vanessa started shouting again. This is insane. Where are we supposed to go? No one responded. Inside the mansion, movers began carrying furniture toward the driveway. Tables, chairs, suitcases, boxes. The once luxurious home was slowly being emptied. Chinidu stood frozen in the middle of the driveway, watching everything disappear, watching the life he once flaunted crumble in front of him. And standing at the center of it all was the woman he had thrown away, the woman he once believed didn't belong in his world. Now she was the one taking his house. Adiz turned slightly toward her staff. Make sure everything is properly documented. Yes, ma'am. Chinidu looked at her again. There was disbelief in his eyes, but also something else. Regret. Deep, painful regret. For the first time in years, he truly understood the weight of the mistake he had made. And as the final pieces of furniture were carried outside, he realized something that cut deeper than the loss of his home. The woman he had once discarded had become stronger than he ever imagined. And he had lost her forever. The driveway of the mansion had become a chaotic scene. Furniture sat scattered across the pavement. Couches, tables, suitcases, and boxes piled carelessly beside the gate. The once luxurious home now looked like a property abandoned after a storm. Neighbors had begun gathering along the street, whispering among themselves as they watched the spectacle unfold. Few things attracted attention like the fall of a wealthy man. Chinidu stood in the center of the driveway, staring blankly as the last of his belongings were carried outside by the movers. Everything he had built, everything he had once bragged about, was gone. Vanessa paced angrily beside the gate, shouting into her phone. This is unbelievable, she snapped. No, I can't stay with you. I'm not sleeping on anyone's couch. She ended the call and turned toward Chinidu in frustration. Do something. Chinidu barely responded. What do you expect me to do? Fix this. I can't. Vanessa threw her hands into the air. You said you were rich. I was. Well, clearly not anymore. Her voice was loud enough for the nearby crowd to hear. Several neighbors exchanged amused glances. Vanessa pointed angrily toward Adiz, who stood calmly beside the bank vehicle reviewing documents with her staff. Go talk to her. Chinidu looked at Adiz. She stood confidently in a fitted gray suit, her posture strong and composed. The same woman he had once pushed out of this house now stood in charge of everything happening. Even more shocking, she was standing tall on both legs. No crutches, no cane. The sight still felt unreal to him. Vanessa shoved his shoulder impatiently. Well, go. Chinidu swallowed hard. Slowly, he began walking toward Adiz. Each step felt heavier than the last. When he reached her, she looked up briefly from the documents. Yes, Mr. Okafor? The formal tone in her voice stung him. Adiz. She waited silently. Chinidu glanced at the bank staff standing nearby. Can we talk? Adiz closed the folder in her hands. You have 5 minutes. They stepped a short distance away from the others. For a moment, Chinidu struggled to find the right words. Finally he spoke. I made a terrible mistake. Adiz's face remained calm. Which one? He blinked. What? You've made several. Her words were not cruel, just honest. Chinidu lowered his head. I shouldn't have treated you the way I did. No, Adiz agreed quietly. You shouldn't have. He rubbed his hands together nervously. I was arrogant. Yes, I let success change me. She said nothing. I thought money made me better than everyone else. Adiz watched him silently. And I believed people who cared about luxury were the only ones who belonged in my life. His voice cracked slightly. But I was wrong. Adiz crossed her arms. Very wrong. Behind them, Vanessa was still yelling at one of the movers. Be careful with that box. Chinidu glanced toward the house before speaking again. I lost everything. Adiz looked toward the mansion. Yes, I didn't listen to anyone. That's true. I thought Vanessa loved me. Adiz raised an eyebrow. And now? Chinidu gave a bitter laugh. She loved the money. Adiz remained quiet. Adiz, please. Her gaze hardened slightly. Please what? Help me. The request hung heavily in the air. Adiz studied him carefully. You're asking the woman you threw out of your house to help you keep that same house? Chinidu looked ashamed. I know I don't deserve it. No, you don't. But I'm begging you. Adiz exhaled slowly. Do you remember the night you threw me out? His face tightened. Yes. You pointed to that gate. She gestured toward the large iron gate behind them. And you said, you should leave. Chinidu closed his eyes briefly. I remember. I asked you where I would go. His voice was barely a whisper. I know. And you said it wasn't your problem. Silence stretched between them. Finally Adiz spoke again. That night I slept on a bus stop bench. Chinidu's eyes widened. What? For days. His stomach twisted with guilt. I didn't know. No. You didn't care enough to find out. Chinidu looked like someone who had just been struck. Behind them, the last pieces of furniture were being loaded onto the sidewalk. The once grand house now stood empty. Vanessa finally stormed over toward them. Chinidu, this is ridiculous, she shouted. Then she noticed the conversation. Her eyes narrowed. So this is the famous ex-wife. Adiz turned toward her calmly. Vanessa looked her up and down with open disdain. I can't believe you're begging her, she scoffed. Chinidu snapped. Be quiet. Vanessa stared at him in shock. Excuse me? I said be quiet. The sudden outburst startled everyone nearby. Vanessa crossed her arms angrily. So now you're defending her? Chinidu's patience finally broke. You're the one who spent all my money. Vanessa laughed. You spent it willingly. Because you kept pushing. She shrugged. Well, that's your problem. Then she turned toward Adiz. You can have him if you want. Adiz simply smiled slightly. No thank you. Vanessa rolled her eyes. Whatever. She grabbed one of the suitcases and dragged it toward the road. I'm not staying here to watch this. Within minutes, she had called a taxi and disappeared down the street. Just like that, she was gone. Chinidu watched her leave with hollow eyes. The woman he had chosen over his wife had abandoned him the moment his money disappeared. Adiz spoke quietly. That must hurt. He nodded. It does. But now you understand something. What? Real love doesn't disappear when money does. Chinidu looked at her. You loved me like that. Yes. And I destroyed it. Yes. He took a deep breath. Adiz. If you could find it in your heart to forgive me. She shook her head gently. I forgive you. Hope flickered in his eyes. Then maybe. But forgiveness doesn't mean returning. His hope vanished. I see. Adiz glanced toward the bank staff waiting beside the car. I've rebuilt my life. He looked down at the ground. I heard. I have a career. He nodded. Yes. And someone who truly cares about me. Chinidu looked up. Stunned. She smiled softly. Yes. Chinidu sighed deeply. I'm glad you found happiness. Adiz paused before responding. So am I. She turned and began walking back toward the bank vehicle. Each step she took was steady and confident. Chinidu watched her walk away. The same woman he once believed was weak, broken, and beneath his new lifestyle. Now she was stronger than he had ever been. Adiz opened the car door. Before getting inside, she looked back one final time. Chinidu stood alone in the empty driveway, surrounded by the ruins of the life he had destroyed. She spoke one last sentence. Take care of yourself, Chinidu. Then she entered the vehicle. The car drove away, leaving Chinidu standing on the sidewalk beside the boxes that contained everything he had left. And as the mansion gates closed behind the bank team, he finally understood the greatest truth of his life. The woman he threw away had been the greatest treasure he ever had. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to this channel and tell us where you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.